So this was me, Easter weekend at 9:45 a.m. on Saturday, when I received final confirmation that it would be nice if I could produce a recorded PechaKucha as soon as I can. So I thought it appropriate to throw my Easter eggs out of my cot and throw a tantrum before putting on my big boy pants and just getting on with it. But let me first introduce myself. Gus sent me here to Washington, D.C. to lobby government for Paradowski. Just kidding. My role is business development and find some new clients for Paradowski. It's been a hairy time here amid the crises of pandemic, economic devastation, racial wounds in need of repair, and a deep partisan rancor which has damaged faith in our democracy. So what am I here to talk to you about today? How about why I was born in Africa? It's a subject that provides an easy source of content, and it affords the opportunity to try my hand at PechaKucha-style storytelling, which is such an important part of what we do at Paradowski. So without further ado, let's jump into it. They say it's good to put some kind of graphic onto a presentation to sort of frame up what is to come and make it look more strategic. So here's my attempt at it. I believe there were three primary forces that shaped where I was born: ancestry, history, and yes, politics. Hopefully this will be more clearly understood by the time we get to the end of the 20th slide in this presentation. So this is where it all started. A proud family descended from the Chisholm clan, living in Aberdeen, Scotland. And yes, that is the Clan Chisholm motto and dress tartan on the left. Unfortunately, the Chisholm clan chose to support the Jacobite rebellion and ended up on the losing side of the Battle of Culloden. Damn those English. My grandfather was a ship engineer by profession and moved to Southampton, England, which was a major port, and joined a large steamship company called the Union Castle Line. It's famous for carrying mail and cargo mainly to the Middle East and South Africa. My father was born in 1926, whilst my grandfather was away at sea. And then on September the 1st, 1939, the grave news, Britain's declaration of war on Germany. With the war came repurposing of ships and people to best serve Britain's war effort. My grandfather was drafted into the Royal Navy, and my father at the age of 16 went to sea as a cadet with the Merchant Navy, and his older sister, that's Lorna on the right, volunteered for service with the Women's Royal Naval Service. Now, remember, this was a period of history when the British Empire was still at its peak. Its colonies spanned 5 continents, and you might have even heard the expression, the empire on which the sun never sets. During this period of history, it was highly aspirational to emigrate to certain colonies, and this was encouraged by the government of the day. One of those British colonies was in Central Africa. So it was called the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. And this federation was comprised of 3 separate countries. There was Northern Rhodesia, which became Zambia in 1964, Nyasaland, which became Malawi, also in 1964, and Southern Rhodesia, which finally gained independence as Zimbabwe in 1980. But we'll come back to the Africa story later. For now, let's return to England. So if you remember, my father, Malcolm Chisholm, followed in the footsteps of his father, and after completing his sailing and navigational training, went to sea as a cadet in 1942 at the age of 16. At this point, Britain had been at war for 3 years. And this was my father's first ship. It was called the MV Richmond Castle. It was a Union Castle Steamship Company refrigerated ship, repurposed during the war to carry food to England. These ships would either travel as part of an escorted convoy across the Atlantic, or occasionally they would travel independently, charting a zigzag course at higher speed to present a more difficult target for German submarines. Their luck ran out on August the 8th, 1942, which was when the Richmond Castle was struck in mid-Atlantic by a torpedo launched by U-176, captained by Korvettenkapitein Rainer Dirksen. The ship sank by the stern within 20 minutes. It sank so fast, the Richmond Castle's radio operator did not even have time to broadcast an SOS before abandoning his station. 2 lifeboats managed to get away from the ship. The U-boat surfaced, approached the lifeboats, and confirmed no SOS signal had gone out. Some first aid kits and provisions were handed to the survivors, and the submarine then departed to resume its patrol. My father survived in a lifeboat similar to this for 10 days in extremely difficult conditions, his legs immersed in extremely cold North Atlantic water. They were eventually rescued by a neutral ship, the Irish Pine, and eventually repatriated back to England, where, in my father's own words, his mother was pleased to see him again. After he had recovered, he returned to sea and participated in further action in the Mediterranean and transported American troops to England for the D-Day invasion of Europe. Around this time, my father was advised by his doctor to move to a warm climate, as in a cold, damp place like England, he would suffer from arthritis and rheumatism due to that lifeboat ordeal. So he retired from a 5-year career at sea to go and work for an uncle who then was a tobacco farmer in that country's southern Rhodesia. He hated farming, gave it up, and joined the federal government's Department of Customs and Excise instead. Which is probably a good thing, because I'm now going to segue briefly to my mother, Elva, and Elva Crocker, who grew up as a girl in Cape Town, South Africa, and moved to southern Rhodesia with her parents, where she was employed by the government as a draftswoman, working in the office of the quantity surveyor. My parents then met as fellow federal government workers. They were stationed in Salisbury, southern Rhodesia, which today is known as Harare, Zimbabwe. In fact, this barracks block, which was at a disused Royal Air Force base, was converted to house government workers, and it was there that they met, they courted, and eventually they married in 1952. I was born in January 1960 in southern Rhodesia, just prior to a major turning point in African history, captured best by the British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, who made the speech in February 1960 to say, "The wind of change is blowing through this African continent, and whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact. We must all accept it as a fact, and our national policies must take account of it." It was the sunset of British colonialism in Africa. I'm grateful to have lived in southern Africa, including Zimbabwe, Malawi, and South Africa. I grew up with a love for storytelling and the African fables and proverbs, which are powerful storytelling devices. My first job ever was working as a reporter for the national paper of Malawi, which is why when Gus said, "Paradowski loves telling stories," I jumped at the opportunity to work with you all. So it's time to wrap this up. I hope I've achieved my communication objective, which was to explain why I was born in Africa. Hopefully you relate more to the folks on the left of this picture than to the right. And at this point of the presentation, if they're going to have a feedback document, please be kind. Thank you for your time. This is Washington, D.C. Over and out.